Tom, we spent a little bit of time talking about the updated Official Languages Act. Played some of Justin Trudeau and Jeanette Petitpas-Taylor trying to sell this idea, which may go over pretty well for minorities in other provinces, but is not going over well in Quebec, and not just because, of Francophone politicians here, but because even Quebec Community Groups Network is wondering where's the details? There are none to this, apparently.
Right, and that's going to be one of the problems, of course, because it has been going through parliamentary committee. People like Anthony Housefather and before him, Mark Garneau, were on top of this because there are some really serious problems with Bill C-13, which is the federal law. And I note with great interest that on Monday, May 8th, we're going to have, and I'm going to translate it for you because it's in French, a new era of collaboration in official languages, a joint conference by the governments of Canada and Quebec. And who do we have? Well, we have Jeanette Petitpas-Taylor and Minister Roberge on the same stage saying that, everything's hunky-dory. Now, that's actually good news for the overall picture across the country. But here's the problem with the details, because the devil's always in the details. So here's what's hiding in Bill 96 that we all know about. We've talked about it many times. Bill 96, for example, purports to unilaterally change the British North America Act. It removes the equality of English and French before the courts. You've probably gotten tons of calls from people who are saying, I'm being told that because my divorce papers are from the States or from somewhere else in Canada, that they can no longer be produced in a court here in Quebec. They have to be translated. I'm an Anglo selling my house to an Anglo, and we're being told that we have to draw everything up in French and all that stuff. Bill 96 also has provisions in it that are outrageously unconstitutional, but they're protected by the notwithstanding clause. So Trudeau just a couple of months ago, waxing poetic in Trois-Rivières, gave an interview to Joël Denis-Bellavance of the La Presse newspaper, and he said, look, I might actually just go headlong after, the use of the notwithstanding clause in 96, 21, and so forth. It has to be clarified. Then he completely slinked back from that. We heard nothing more of that because he got beaten up roundly. And lo and behold, we're getting back with this. Now, I have nothing against the idea that, for example, a worker in a federally regulated company in Quebec has the same right as every other worker in Quebec in a provincially regulated company to get their instructions, and it's a right to get their instructions from their employer in French. That's easy peasy. The rest of it, though, means that Mark Garneau's worry that about what we actually technically call incorporation by reference. So you put into Bill C-13 a reference to Bill 96, because you refer to the Charter of the French language, which would then obviously at that moment include Bill 96, and lo and behold, you've legitimized it. So you get before the Supreme Court, you try to say, well, this is a huge problem, and the lawyers on the other side, and probably a bunch of the judges, look down and say, well, if it's such a huge problem, why did the federal government and the federal parliament, more importantly, include that in a bill that it adopted if it's such a problem? So it really weakens the ability to question the most offensive aspects of Bill 96. It's a huge problem, but since it took me over 2 minutes to explain that, anytime something's complicated, then it's very hard to push it forward.
I quote you all the time: if you're splaining, you're losing.
Exactly.
We were talking, though. Natasha actually brought up this idea that, and I think other people shared this when we brought up the question, that this idea of throwing this money, and I'm talking now just at Quebec, the 140 some odd million going to Anglophone groups here, is a way to distract from Bill 96 because they've still not really talked anything about it.
And to placate us, just simply say, here's some money, we're not going to do anything about Bill 96, but look, we still care. Look, here's some.
And who do you think the first person saying that's going to be? It's going to be Anna Gainey when she's running an NDG, right? I mean, that's going to be her first answer anytime anybody questions any of this stuff. Now, because I live in the countryside and I know how incredibly important it is to have services in English, including, the school services, which are supposed to be guaranteed. But again, Legault's trying to take away the right to English language boards, which are guaranteed under the Constitution. How long does that last? Does that weaken? See, 23 doesn't specifically mention school boards. It's been by interpretation, because I know a bit about this because I was there when it was being drafted, because Gérard Bertrand, the lead drafter from Ottawa, came and visited us, the legal department at the Conseil de la langue française. And my old buddy, the much regretted Michel Sparer, said, well, instead of talking about schools, because it says, people of the linguistic minority have a right to send their kids to school, make it wider, for interpretation purposes, put, établissement, not just school buildings, but obviously the institutions that go with it. And lo and behold, the Supreme Court widened the interpretation of 23 to constitutionally protect the French boards outside Quebec. When Nova Scotia got rid of its boards a few years ago, they didn't dare touch the French boards because they knew they were protected. Here in Quebec, no such shyness. Let's go after and target the English boards. They've been pushed back so far by the courts. But is that going to change? Because when Petitpas-Taylor said in the most incredibly ham-fisted way that the only minority language that needs protecting in Canada is the French language. Oopsie, what about native languages? Aren't they in a spot of trouble, Ms. Petitpas-Taylor? But I digress. When she puts that on the table and says, this is what this bill is about, there's only one official minority language community in Canada that needs protecting, does the protection of the English language school boards get put on a slippery slope with that? I would say that going back to Mark Garneau, I think that that's one of the key problems with 96 and with the whole approach around C13. Nobody's thinking this through completely. No, I don't need to be told that the English-speaking community of Quebec has built institutions like strong universities and good hospitals. And yes, compared to the French-speaking minorities in the rest of Canada, we've got it. We're pretty well off. I'm not going to argue that point. But are we going to be all about lowering everything to a common denominator as much as possible, or do we try to build up? And if we're lowering to a common denominator, we do the types of things that they're doing here. And we imperil the right of the English-speaking community to control and manage its school boards. It's that simple legally.
Can I ask, you mentioned this yesterday, I think, when we talked, first of all, we heard from the PQ, from Pascal Bérubé today, saying that this money being handed out as part of the Official Languages Act to Anglophones, of course, is a disgrace. It's unnecessary. Mario Beaulieu basically doing the same thing. What was the pushback today when you were on with your French counterparts?
Oh, great question. Very little, because went through it and said, well, look, they're about equal size. The English-speaking minority in Quebec, ballpark $1 million. Francophones outside Quebec, ballpark $1 million. And 80% of the money is going to the Francophones outside Quebec and 20% to the Anglophones in Quebec. And when you start to break it down like that and you reference and you make people understand that there are small English-speaking communities along the lower North Shore, places like La Tabatière, the Blanc Sablon, they need help. And the Maggies, the Magdalen Islands have, several places that are very Anglophone. Then you go down to the Gaspé. I mean, those are all communities that are fragile. They need help in terms of getting services. So I think that cooler heads are prevailing. And it's kind of interesting for me that Pascal Bérubé that's all he's got left, right? And it's also very interesting to me that this is not a horse that Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon jumps onto too easily. So he leaves this hot-headed stuff for the old-timers in the PQ to Pascal Bérubé, who is very much in tune with the old-timer hotheads of the PQ online. And PSPP gets to continue to try to ride above it a little bit, because I don't think that in his heart of hearts these are battles that he thinks is going to lead to his primary goal, which is the independence of Quebec.
Before we run out of time, I just really want to touch on this story because I was pretty surprised to read that Quebec MNAs don't get any kind of paid maternity or paternity leave. So
you were reading that about Marwa Risky when she handed off her child their MNA to take care of it during the... Yeah.
What a beautiful scene, right? But then what a shame to find out that I thought how wonderful they're bringing their baby, and yet now I see they're kind of in a bit of a bind here. They're going to review this, though, evidently, Tom.
Yeah, talk about glass ceilings. This is a glass ceiling with, steel pillars holding it in place. The problem, of course, is we keep saying, well, we need more young women in politics. And lo and behold, in the last municipal elections across the province, bam, you've got tons of really capable young women bringing a very fresh view, sustainable development, pushing aside some of the old timers. It's really rough on them. There's so much misogyny. It's very tough. But everything, all the structures in place, of course, go against that, right? And one young mayor that I know, she was breastfeeding her baby, and old timers were railing, saying, this is just horrible. They want to do something about this. And so it's a clash not only of cultures, but a clash of generations, and a very fresh new way of looking at it. And when you know that all of the important stuff, the business end of things like reducing greenhouse gases more and more, it's the grassroots. It's local, regional, municipal governments. So really good stuff is happening municipally. But look at the National Assembly. At least in Ottawa, we worked on this years and years ago, getting childcare and things like that in Ottawa and opening things up. Mm-hmm. Quebec is still so backward on this stuff, and good on the new speaker on wanting to move forward on this stuff. Yeah.
All right.
She'll get it done.
Tom, thank you. We'll talk to you again tomorrow.